Everyone knows Louisiana is the most French state in America. French Quarter, French culture, French law. But here's what nobody tells you. Louisiana's legal system doesn't come from France at all. It comes from Spain. The Napoleonic Code that everyone credits was written in 1804, a full year after America bought Louisiana. By then, Spanish law had already shaped the territory for 4 decades. That single fact explains why Louisiana still functions like a foreign country inside American borders. To understand why this matters, you have to see what it actually means when a state runs on entirely different logic than the rest of the country. Every other state in America operates on common law, a system inherited from England where law is built from court decisions. Judges rule on cases, those rulings become precedents, and future cases follow the pattern. It's flexible, it evolves, and it's what American lawyers spend 3 years learning. Louisiana operates on civil law. Instead of building from precedents, civil law builds from written codes. The rules are spelled out in advance, and judges interpret them rather than create new ones. It sounds like a technicality until you realize what it actually means in practice. Contracts assigned in Louisiana may be completely unenforceable under common law logic. Property ownership follows different rules. Marriage, inheritance, community property, business formation, all of it operates on principles that lawyers from other states never studied. A law student in Louisiana learns a fundamentally different curriculum than a law student in Texas or New York. Here's the practical consequence. A lawyer licensed in Louisiana often cannot practice in most other states without essentially starting over. And a lawyer from anywhere else cannot walk into a Louisiana courtroom and assume they know how things work. The state isn't just culturally different, it's legally different in ways that affect every contract, every deed, and every will. The legal system isn't the only thing that survived from colonial rule. Look at any map of Louisiana and something immediately stands out. The state doesn't have counties, it has parishes, 64 of them. The term comes from Catholic ecclesiastical districts under French and Spanish rule. When Louisiana joined the Union in 1812, it refused to adopt the American county system. Other new states fell in line, dividing their territory into counties like the rest of the country. Louisiana said no. In 1845, the state constitution made it official. Parishes would remain the permanent administrative division. Every other state in the continental United States uses counties, but Louisiana never has. That raises an obvious question. Why did America allow this? The answer traces back to one decision made by Thomas Jefferson. When Jefferson completed the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, he faced a choice. He could force 50,000 French and Spanish colonists to adopt American law overnight, risking chaos, rebellion, and economic collapse in a territory America desperately needed to control. Or he could let them keep their legal system and absorb them peacefully. Jefferson chose stability over uniformity, and that single pragmatic decision froze Louisiana in a different legal century. But the law is only the surface. To understand why Louisiana truly became the opposite of America, you have to understand who ended up there and how they arrived. In 1755, 20 years before America even existed, the British controlled a strip of land called Nova Scotia in eastern Canada. French-speaking farmers called Acadians had lived there for 150 years. They had built farms, raised families, and developed a distinct culture that blended French Catholicism with the harsh realities of North Atlantic life. But the British didn't trust them. The Acadians refused to swear unconditional loyalty to the British Crown, and British authorities feared they would side with France in any future conflict. So on July 28, 1755, the Nova Scotia Council passed a resolution that would echo through centuries. The colonial record states it plainly. We resolve to remove every Acadian man, woman, and child. What followed was one of the largest forced deportations in colonial North American history. British soldiers surrounded Acadian villages without warning. Families were separated at gunpoint, husbands from wives, parents from children. Homes were burned to prevent return, and ships scattered the Acadians across the Atlantic world like seeds thrown into the wind. Some ended up in France, strangers in their ancestral homeland. Some were dumped in the Caribbean. Others landed in the American colonies, where they were treated as enemies and foreign refugees. Over 11,000 people were torn from their homes. Many died on the ships from disease, starvation, and despair. Those who survived spent decades wandering, stateless and unwanted, searching for anywhere that would take French-speaking Catholic refugees. They found one place, Spanish Louisiana. Spain, which controlled the territory at the time, welcomed the Acadians. They were Catholic, they were farmers, and they were willing to settle land that no one else wanted. Over the following decades, survivors drifted into the bayous and prairies of southern Louisiana. They arrived with nothing but their language and their faith, and over time they became something new. The word Acadian softened in local pronunciation. Acadian became Cadian, and Cadian became Cajun. The name itself carries the scar of what was lost. The Acadians didn't choose Louisiana for its beauty. They chose it because no one else wanted it. Southern Louisiana is barely land at all. The water table sits at the surface, and if you dig a few feet down almost anywhere, you hit water. The ground is saturated, unstable, and hostile to conventional settlement. This creates a problem that surprises most outsiders. Even the dead can't be buried underground. Coffins placed in the earth have been known to float back up after heavy rains, rising through the waterlogged soil like something refusing to stay buried. New Orleans solved this problem the only way it could. The city's cemeteries became cities of the dead, vast fields of above-ground vaults stacked like ovens, with bodies placed in stone chambers rather than in the ground. Walk through the St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 and you're walking through rows of miniature buildings, a city within a city built for the dead because the land itself refused to hold them. It's not superstition or tradition for tradition's sake. It's engineering, a practical solution to impossible geography. But this same hostile landscape created something unexpected: natural walls. Bayous, slow-moving channels threading through swamps and marshlands, became highways that outsiders couldn't navigate. The maze of waterways had no maps that non-locals could follow, no paths that made sense to people who hadn't grown up tracing them. Communities separated by water developed in near-total isolation from each other and from the outside world. Languages evolved differently in different bayous, recipes varied from one parish to the next, and traditions that would have been diluted anywhere else were preserved for generations because there was simply no one around to dilute them. The Cajuns settled among over 2 million wild alligators spread across 3 million acres of wetlands. They learned to hunt them, eat them, and coexist with them. The swamps that seemed hostile to outsiders became home to people who had nowhere else to go. The very landscape that made Louisiana uninhabitable also made it unconquerable. No army could easily sweep through, and no outside culture could easily penetrate. The water that made the land impossible was also the water that protected it. Louisiana became a pressure cooker. French refugees mixed with Spanish colonists. Free people of African descent who had more rights under Spanish law than they would have under Anglo-American rule established communities and businesses. Caribbean immigrants brought flavors and rhythms from the islands, and Native American nations, Choctaw, Huma, Chitimacha, contributed knowledge and traditions of their own. Everyone was trapped in the same impossible landscape. They couldn't leave, and they couldn't be reached, so they fused. What emerged from this isolation wasn't just survival, it was invention, and you can taste it, hear it, and see it on any street corner in New Orleans. Take gumbo. It's not just a soup, it's a historical document served in a bowl. The base comes from French roux, butter and flour cooked together until it darkens. The okra comes from West Africa, carried across the Atlantic in the memory and seeds of enslaved people. The filet powder, ground sassafras leaves, comes from the Choctaw, and the spices trace back to Spanish and Caribbean influence. You can literally taste the collision of civilizations in a single spoonful, each ingredient marking a people who ended up in the same impossible place. Jazz funerals follow the same logic of fusion. When someone dies in New Orleans, a brass band leads the mourners through the streets. playing slow dirges as the procession makes its way to the cemetery. It's somber and heavy with grief. But after the burial, something shifts. The music transforms. Dirges give way to celebration, the tempo rises, and horns blare in joy. The second line, the crowd of people following behind the band, transforms into a spontaneous street party. Death acknowledged, life reclaimed. It's African circle dancing fused with European brass bands and Catholic funeral tradition. A ritual that could not have emerged anywhere else because nowhere else had this particular combination of isolation and collision. Even Mardi Gras operates differently here than the parades most Americans picture. In rural Louisiana, the Courrier de Mardi Gras survives, an ancient begging ritual where costumed riders on horseback race through the countryside. They sing at farmhouses, chase chickens through yards, and collect ingredients for communal gumbo that the entire community shares. It's medieval French tradition preserved in Louisiana prairie towns, practiced continuously for centuries while disappearing everywhere else. In 1875, Louisiana became the only state in America to make Mardi Gras a legal holiday. Children still get an entire week off school. Try that in Ohio. The geography that protected Louisiana is now destroying it. Here's a statistic that's hard to comprehend. A football field-sized chunk of Louisiana's wetland vanishes into the Gulf of Mexico every 100 minutes. Not every year, not every month, every 100 minutes, another piece of Louisiana becomes open water. Between 1932 and 2000, the state lost 1,900 square miles of land, an area the size of Delaware simply gone. Some coastal regions are sinking at over half an inch per year while sea levels rise to meet them. This isn't just natural erosion. When the Mississippi River was levied to prevent flooding, a necessary choice to protect cities and farms, the sediment that used to replenish the coast stopped arriving. For thousands of years, spring floods deposited millions of tons of silt across the delta, building land faster than the Gulf could claim it. The levees stopped the floods, but they also stopped the land from rebuilding itself. Oil and gas extraction made things worse. Pulling hydrocarbons from underground caused the land to compact and sink, and pipelines carved channels through marshes that let salt water penetrate further inland. Each year, the combination accelerates. The land that isolation built is being erased by the forces of modernity. Hurricane Katrina showed what happens when the geography fights back. In 2005, levees failed across New Orleans, and water poured into neighborhoods that sat below sea level, protected only by walls that weren't strong enough. 1,170 people died in Louisiana alone, 40% of them from drowning. Nearly half the victims were 75 or older, people who couldn't evacuate, who rode out the storm in homes that became traps. The city that shouldn't exist nearly ceased to exist. In the 1960s, roughly 1 million Louisianans spoke French or French-based Creole at home. It was the language of kitchen tables and front porches, of grandparents telling stories to grandchildren, of everyday life in communities that had spoken French for 2 centuries. Today, that number has collapsed. Only about 1.6% of the state speaks French at home, and the number keeps falling. The language that survived British deportation, survived Spanish rule, survived American absorption, survived isolation in the swamps, it may not survive the age of television and standardized education. Young people grow up speaking English, and grandparents die and take the old words with them, but something strange is happening. As the language fades, the culture it carried is being preserved in other forms. In gumbo recipes passed down through families, in brass band traditions taught to new generations, in legal codes that still operate on 18th century Spanish logic, while lawyers in Houston and Atlanta scratch their heads. Louisiana is becoming a monument to itself, a place where the surface markers of culture endure even as the living language that created them slips away. Louisiana became the opposite of every other American state because it was built by people who had no other options. Deported Acadians who wandered for decades before finding a home. Spanish colonists stranded by shifting empires. Free people of African descent seeking rights denied elsewhere. Caribbean refugees fleeing revolution. They all landed in a place so hostile that no one followed them, so isolated that no one could dilute what they built. The legal system is Spanish because Spain ruled when America arrived. The parishes exist because the Catholic Church organized settlement before any American institution could. The cemeteries are above ground because the water table reaches the surface. The food, the music, the parades, all of it traces back to isolation, desperation, and the particular alchemy of survival. Stand anywhere else in America, and you're standing on common law, county governance, and Anglo-American inheritance. Stand in Louisiana, and you're standing on the opposite. A state built against geography by people who had no choice. And because they had no choice, they built something that could only exist here. Thanks for watching. If you want to see how geography shaped other parts of America, check out one of the videos on screen now, and if you haven't already, subscribe to Fact Atlas so you don't miss the next one.